Hello everybody, Zachary and the Rapid Squad here. And for today's video, as I talked about previously on this channel, we are going to take a look at the two Paddington films. We are going to take a look at the Paddington films on this channel, both the first one and the second one. Which means that the first movie we gotta take a look at today is the 2014 or 2015 is the 2014 Paddington film, which released in cinemas as on December 28th in December of 2014. Or if you live in the US, you got it on January 16th, 2015. Or if you live in the US, you most likely got it January 16th, 2015. Anyways, Paddington is based on the book series by Michael Bond, which follows the adventures of a young bear in Peru, who traveled from Peru to London and found residence in the home of and found a family in London with the Brown family. And the books follow all the stuff Paddington gets up to in London. This book series, and in 2000 and it was as close to getting to the time where Paddington was integrating himself from the US, from London, from the UK, to having himself be a pretty big deal in the US, with the cartoon from Cookie Jar, released in the 90s or the 2000s, I think, somewhere around the 90s, with the animated series created by Cookie Jar, the same people who created the series Caillou. And it was about time that in 2015, that in the 2010s, a certain company would get their hands on a company known as Studio Canal would get their hands on the marmalade-loving bear and turn him in and have him have his own movie. Which, by the trailers, which featured such scenes as Paddington using toothbrushes in his ears and licking his earwax. Yeah, that happened in the trailer. But I wouldn't really consider that the movie's fault, because it's just the fact that the company who distributed the movie in the US, the Weinstein Company, wow, that aged poorly, decided to pretty much did the worst job at marketing the feature. not only did... Because in the trailer for the film, they showed the... Because in the movie, the full bathroom scene that's shown in the trailer for the film is very, very short. Is a very, very short scene in the movie. And I don't even think... And I'm pretty sure the Weinstein Company, being the Weinstein Company, just thought that if they have some... That kids like jokes about eating earwax for some reason. And a lot of people were getting afraid that this movie would be absolute dog crap. Or, I'm sorry, bear crap. But when the movie came out in 2015, it was pretty good. And by good, I mean, it was freaking fantastic. Critics were loving how charming it was. And it did make a decent number at the box office. And even though it didn't make that much at the box office domestically, with about $76 million, hers on a budget of $55 million, which is still considered a success, but not that big in the US compared to other movies. This film also had one big thing. It was a huge success in the UK, of course, in overseas markets. It's of course in the UK, Paddington's home country, Paddington's home of the UK, where the movie made $282 million at the box office, far exceeding its budget. And even though it took me a while and even though it took many people in the US a while to see the film, it's been critically beloved by a whole crap ton of people. Where even the sequel, for the longest time, held the record for one of the only movies is to stay at a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, till most recently when some jerk decided to bump it down to 99%. And sadly, after the movie's release, he's the author of the original. A couple of years after the movie's release, he's the author of the book. Michael Bond would pass away on June 27th in 2017 at the age of 91 years old. At the age of 91. Sadly, this would be about a couple months before, and even more sadly, this would just be a mere 5 months till the release. This was just 5 months before the release of Paddington 2. But I guess he still had time to write that movie but he still had time to get involvement in that movie, and even by my surprise, looking up this video, he had involvement as a writer on the 2020 Paddington series on Nick Jr. Anyways, on to the movie itself. I think it's a fantastic film. The movie starts off with an opening sequence featuring our main character, her Paddington Bear, played by Ben Whishaw. I think that's his name. And as he lives with his Uncle Pastuzo, and Aunt Lucy. During a storm, Uncle Pastuzo ends up dying. Because it's a children's movie and we can't keep any parental figure, and we can't keep both the parental figures alive in a family film, of course. So Paddington decides to travel. And because of an English explorer talking from the past who told old Uncle Pastuzo and Aunt Lucy about London, and Aunt Lucy decides to send Paddington to London while he goes to the bear retirement home. Yes, that's literally what they say in the movie, that she goes to the bear retirement home. So Paddington ends up going to London, and then after someone finds out some marmalade tracks Paddington left, the word gets out to our main villain of the feature, her played by Nicole Kidman, and who wants to kill Paddington, who wants to stuff Paddington for what happened with her father, and that he ended up being shunned by the explorers. After discovering these talking bears, after discovering the intelligent bears. Paddington soon finds himself in a train station, and where he meets the Brown family. With the two main ones, and being Mrs. Brown, who is with the family, including Mrs. Brown, played by, I think her name's Sally Hawkins or something. I'll need to look that up after. The video, but we have Mrs. Brown, who does art and is drawing a series, and draws some sort of mystery series. Henry or Mr. Brown, played by Hugh Bonneville, who is the overprotective father who also works as some sort of person working with safety, which he does really enforce on the family. His son Jonathan, and who is the teenage son who is the son of the family, who wants to build rockets, who wants to do the stuff that but his father who gets pretty upset with his father that he's with all his safety stuff. And then we have the daughter of the family, who I really forgot the children's character in the movie, to be honest. But more notably, and the character who has one of the best scenes near the end of the movie, Mrs. Bird, is the maid of the household, who is there so that the movie can have, who is there in the movie. Yeah, I haven't seen Paddington in a while. Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, the characters in this movie, besides the main two the family in this movie, besides the Browns, do not get that much of a character in this movie. As the ones who mostly get a character arc in the film is Mary and Henry, who are, well, the rest of the family, the sequel kind of gives a better, well, I'd say the sequel does do a better job at getting the whole family, at getting some more character for the family. And after a couple of mishaps and shenanigans, and they have to, and this leads into a couple shenanigans with Paddington, and ends up with a scene where, and by the end of the movie, the Browns accept Paddington in the family. And all the Brown, and the villain is defeated via marmalade sandwich. But my thoughts on Paddington is that I think it's a very charming film, which I think this movie isn't as good as the sequel, but it's still very, very good. It's a charming film where even though the family besides Mrs. Brown and Henry, he don't get as much development as I think they should have in the movie. There's still fun characters, and there's still fun characters in the film. And the actors do a fantastic job. And I also forgot to mention in The Neighbor to the Brown, Mr. Curry, The Neighbor to the Browns, Mr. Curry, played by Doctor Who himself, Peter Capaldi. He does a pretty fantastic job as well. My only gripe with the film would be that the villain kind of seems like your typical movie villain in a film about an animal, in a film that features animals. Where I get where the movie was trying to go for in her character, but my only problem with her is that it feels like the movie just added her in because they needed a villain, because they thought they needed a villain for the film, and they need some way for the climax to happen. But in my opinion, she isn't really that great of a villain. And because she just feels like the typical old villain you see in all sorts of animal films. But even with that, I still commemorate the movie for having some great visuals, especially on Paddington, and some fantastic characters, hers who are lovable and charming, and a pretty good story as well. And the movie definitely has a good bond, and I definitely do like the bond between the family, between the Brown family and Paddington, and as the movie progresses. And the movie does have some. And the movie is actually a pretty well adapted story. Is actually a pretty well adapted story. Is pretty good adaptation to the original story. And unlike some films where they decide to who make the characters all hip and cool with the young kids and add a bunch of pop culture references, this movie just wants to be a charming film that all sorts of people can enjoy. That everybody can enjoy. But overall, for my overall score for Paddington 2014, I'd give this movie a 9 out of 10. I'd give this movie a 9 out of 10. It's a really good film. And not as good as the sequel, which we'll get into that next time. But it's still a charming film with some lovable characters and some enjoyable scenes. With some charming characters and enjoyable moments. That's it for this video, and well, that'll be it for this video, and as for next time, yep, this one's definitely gonna This one's definitely gonna be a good one. See you later, guys, and don't forget, you gotta catch them all.